Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
We today begin a new book of the Torah, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. It is a new part of our story. We really leave the entire story of Genesis behind with a couple of connections just at the very, very beginning, right? We talk about the names that connects us back to the book of Genesis. We talk about the fact that there arose a new Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. That ties us back to Genesis, but from that point on, it's a different story. It's a different story. And we have different characters, different leaders and heroes that we're reading about in this part of our story, the most notable of which is Moses, right? Moses is going to be one of the central figures that will tie not only through the book of Exodus, but actually take us all the way now through the book of Deuteronomy. He is now switching over to our central figure. And my question, as we start to learn about Moses in this week's Parsha, is what type of person is he? What type of leader is he? We hold Moshe up to be a paradigm of leadership for us. Okay, if that's the case, I think it behooves us to actually ask ourselves, what does that mean? Who is he? What type of person is he that we hold up as this paradigm? So before we get into the details, I'm going to ask you, many of us know these stories. What type of person is Moses? What type of leader is Moses? If you had to pick one or maybe two words maximum to describe him, what would you pick? Mark. He was reluctant, good. And as a result, he had a lot of humility. So he was reluctant because it wasn't something he was really looking for. And as a result of that, he had humility. He was a humble leader. Good. What else?
That was actually my first two words.
Okay. Now you got to pick two more.
Exactly. Well, I would say he was an evolving and a growing leader.
Okay, good.
And we see that from the reluctance in the beginning. And he learned by doing, and he learned from his mistakes.
Good. Good. So he was an evolving and a growing leader. He learned by doing. He learned from his mistakes, right? He actually went and asked other people for help later on as we go. Good. March? So he had values, right? And he listened to others. Good. Anybody else?
I think one thing is he was human.
Mm-hmm.
And while he did listen to others, we see where he kind of lost his patience. He lost his temper with them. He, called God out like, "Oh my God, like, you're going to do this," and then they're going to say, "What kind of God are you? Who did all this stuff?" And so I really think that we see his just a whole human side to him.
He was human and he was fallible, right? He made his mistakes. He made his mistakes. And some he learned from and some maybe not. Neil?
He had legitimacy.
Tell me why. Legitimacy?
His boss was God.
He had legitimacy because his boss was God, right? Absolutely. Good. Yes, please. He had faith, right? He had faith. He had faith. And by the way, not every moment was that faith equal, but there were certainly many moments of faith that came through that helped him through difficult times. Good. Anybody else? Yes. He was? Brave. Excellent, excellent. I was just about to ask, do we think that Moshe is courageous, is brave? I was just about to ask that. So we have one vote, yes. It depends when. Okay. Yes?
He was loyal to his people.
He was loyal. He was loyal. he got fed up with him at times, but he was still loyal all the way through. Good. Okay, yes?
He had empathy for not only his people, but for even the Egyptians. He didn't want to see them destroyed, but he was frustrated that they wouldn't listen.
So he had empathy, not only for his own people, but for others, right? There was an angst that he had over the suffering, not only of his own people, but the Egyptian people as well. As Pharaoh was so hard-hearted about it, that it caused him angst. We saw that. He was a family man. Yeah, and no. It's interesting. I struggle with that because we definitely hear that he has a family, but we don't hear about his family the way that we hear about Abraham's family or Isaac's family or Jacob's family. Say it again? His relationship with Aaron, for sure, they were very, very close, right? And Miriam, right, for sure. Less so for Tzipporah and for his kids, right? That's not to say, it's hard to tell because the story doesn't talk about it. It doesn't mean that it wasn't there, but the story doesn't talk about it, right? It only mentions Tzipporah and the kids very, very rarely and with not a lot of detail. Correct. So she went with him, but that actually says more about her than about him, right? That she was willing to go with him into Egypt and into all of that.
Wasn't there a point where she, I mean, this was later, where she actually goes back?
Yes.
She's back for a while, they're kind of separated.
Yeah, there was definitely a point where she goes back, and the rabbis, it's a little unclear in the text of the Torah. The rabbis definitely say she goes back, but yeah, I mean, it says I think more about her than about him. So I question, by the way, is he the model of a good family? Now, he may be the model of a lot of leaders and their families, which not necessarily is good, right? People who have jobs that put them out in the public and put them out in those sorts of things, sometimes their family, suffers for that. Rabbi Orden and I can both speak to that, right? Many birthdays that we've missed and many, because our job does that. But yeah, I don't know about the family piece. That's the one and I want to come back to the brave and courageous for a second, because that's really what I want to focus on today. I want to look at a couple of different moments in this week's Parsha as Moshe is trying to figure out, I think, the type of leader that he wants to be, right? So let's open up in the other books that are in front of you, the Eitz Chaim Chumash, to page 323. So Moses is already somewhat of an adult here. He's an adult. He's grown up in the Pharaoh's household. Sort of that's the part of the story that we're in. And it says, sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen, right? We all know this story. He attacks that taskmaster, kills him, right? Or actually in this one, I think he just hits them. And then later on, he kills them. There's two different ones. And we look at that as being an act of leadership, of courage, right? An act that he's taking a stand. But look at verse 12. He turned this way and that, seeing no one is about, struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Okay? So he saw this injustice and his response, and it's interesting because the Torah doesn't often give us emotional status of people. They just tell the story. But for whatever reason, the Torah felt the need to say he looked this way and that, and when he saw nobody was there, he did it and he hit him in the sand. All right, so that's moment number one. Was he courageous? Was he not courageous? We'll get back to that in a second. Moment number two happens the next sentence. He went out the next day and found two Hebrews fighting. So the first one was an Egyptian taskmaster attacking a Jew and a Hebrew, right? Now he found two Hebrews fighting with each other. And he said, "Why do you strike your fellow?" And the man said, "Who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened. Again, it talks about his status here. It says he was frightened. And he thought, the matter is known. And because of that, he fled from Egypt and from Pharaoh and wound up in the land of Egypt. Wound up in the land of Midian. All right, so we've got two, and we'll get to the third one in a moment, but we have two different moments here. Is this courage? Is it not courage? How do we read this? Is it brave? Is it not brave? Yeah.
I see it as angry and impulsive.
Angry and impulsive.
And later on, when he breaks the tablets.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, he definitely has some anger management issues that he needs to work with in terms of when he broke the tablets and stuff like that. It's possible, right? If we look at the later sections, we can read that back onto this. Maybe we see a hint of that here. Right? Could there have been another way? I mean, he was, in fact, a prince of Egypt, right? Could he have somehow talked to the taskmaster instead of killing the taskmaster? Maybe. Maybe. Anybody else? Karina? Yeah, I mean, look, he's definitely struggling, I think, to figure himself out, and I think maybe some of that angst leads him into the impulsivity and the anger issues, right? Sometimes when we're all torn up about something, we lash out, those emotions come out. It's possible. It's possible. Torah doesn't say that, though, right? The emotions that the Torah key into here seem to be that of fear. Seem to be that of fear. Michal. Yes.
It's actually really bravery when you are afraid.
Good. Good, right? We've heard this many times. It's been quoted in different movies and places around, right? Bravery is not the absence of fear. It's feeling fear and still working your way through that, right? It's dealing with that fear, right? If you're fearless, you're not brave, right? You only can say you're brave if you feel that fear and somehow face that anyway. That's the courage. That's the bravery piece of all of this. And I would argue that that's the point, I think, that this text is trying to make. Right? Why is it that the text goes out of its way to show us that our greatest leader was scared? Right? The text seems to be going out of its way. Let's look down a little bit more. Right? Let's look down a little bit more. We see this evolution within a period of about 10 verses, not even, 7 verses. So we have the Egyptian beating the Hebrew. Moses is fearful. He looks this way and that way and hides him in the sand. We have 2 Hebrews fighting each other. Moses is called out on it. He runs away. Now let's look at verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. When they came to draw the water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense, and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it you've come back so soon?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." What's different about this situation? He was decisive, he was active. The Torah doesn't talk about fear here, right? This is the typical Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other, right? We've got three scenarios that are all very similar to each other, right? Moses is faced with a critical situation, a tense situation, and all of them are very similar, of conflict. And in the first two, he was fearful. And in the last one, he wasn't. Why? Hannah. So I like what you're saying, but I think we could play that same argument from the other side as well, right? It's easier to be brave, and I'm putting that in quotes, when you have power, right? When the implications to you might be less. These people in Midian didn't know who he was. They could have killed him without any thought of repercussion, right? The only person who could have killed him in Egypt was Pharaoh. And he was worried about that. That's why he left, of course. But these shepherds could have killed him. Jethro could have killed him, right, if he wanted to. Who knows, right? He didn't know the social dynamics that were there. And so, yes, I agree with what you're saying, Hannah. But at the same time, sometimes it's easier. I'm thinking about this out loud right now as you're saying it. I'm kind of codifying it. Is it easier to be brave when nobody knows you or when everybody knows you? Okay, I think you might be able to argue it both ways, right? When nobody knows you, it's easier actually to stay quiet. When everybody knows you, everybody's expecting you to do something. So it could be argued either way. Good. So why? What was different here, Michal? Yeah, I mean, I like where you're going with this, and there's a couple of different ways I think to read it, right? There's what role is he playing? Is this about him and himself? Is this about other people? Rabbi Dov Linzer, there's a very interesting book that I've been reading recently. I was just discussing it with Rabbi Ern earlier today. It's called "It Takes Two to Torah." It takes two to Torah. And it is a dialogue between an Orthodox rabbi and a Reform journalist. So Rabbi Dov Linzer is the Orthodox rabbi. Abigail Pogrobin, many know her. She's a journalist, a Reform Jew. And so they're discussing these things back and forth. And one of the things that Rabbi Linzer talks about here is that what we see is a progression from protecting your own against an outside oppressor, to intervening to defend an innocent party, right, between two of your own people, to defending those with whom you have no connection. And he argues that we see a progression as Moses develops as a leader from the particular to the universal, right? That in the beginning, right, most of us are really good at thinking about ourselves, our own needs, or our own family, right? Our own family. And that's really how the Torah puts the first situation, right? He was out amongst his people. That's how he says it. And he sees a non-his people attacking his people. He's going to respond. He's protecting his family, his people. The second time, it's actually all his people. But he sees an injustice there that's going on amongst his own people and feels the need to get involved. And the third one is something that doesn't even concern him. It's just out there, and it's an injustice, it's something that's going wrong, and therefore he feels a need to get involved. And it's a very interesting progression of how do we, as individuals, interact with the world around us when we see injustice. And there's a development. Most of us can act when we see it happening to us. That's when we cry out, or see it happening to somebody we know or we love, right? We say, that's not fair. But when that same thing is happening to somebody else that isn't in our group, do we say something? When it's happening just outside in terms of this is a concept that we need to fight against, this injustice, and pick what it may be, right? Let's talk about slavery, since that's what it is that we're talking about here, right? When our own people, our own family is captured, we say something because it's us. When our people are being affected, we say something. When it's not one of ours, do we say? Do we not say? And I think that's what the beginning of this book is telling us. We're about to go on a journey that's going to last us the rest of our Jewish year. With the people in slavery, leaving from slavery, trying to figure themselves out, going through all of their ups and downs until they finally get or reach the border of the promised land. There's a lot of growth, a lot of learning. And it starts right here at the very, very beginning of Exodus on who do we want to be. And when we see things in the world, how do we respond to that? How do we want to address that? It's a powerful place to start. It's a powerful place to start. Any last questions before or comments? Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, I just think that all three scenarios show us Moses, his sense of right and wrong, how deep that was. And it's a way for God to illustrate to us kind of why he picked him, because the third scenario, he's willing to do whatever it takes and risk his own life. And so I think, that's one of the reasons God chose him.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Moses definitely, he has his moments that he kind of backslides a little bit. But from this point on, Moses is willing to take on, even if it's a little reluctant, even if he second guesses himself, he's willing to go and face Pharaoh. He's willing to face pretty much everything he's afraid of by the end of this week's Parsha, moving into the next. And that goes back to the initial question of courage, right? It's not that he's unafraid. It's that these values of fixing what's wrong is so important to him that he's willing to take risks to do that. Good. Any other comments before we get to our Torah reading? Yes.
I had one more that when you go to chapter 3, and then in verse, I think it's verse 6, where he then has this encounter with God.
Yep.
It says specifically, and he hid his face for he was afraid to
Correct.
see God. So
Correct.
we're seeing another example of fear, but
Right.
I'm sure Marge can speak a lot more about it.
Yeah, he's
So we go, he's like, yeah, I'm kind of scared, I'm gonna hide my face, but, let's see what this whole thing is about. And then they develop their relationship from there.
yeah, his fear doesn't disappear completely. And by the way, the things he's dealing with, they're scary. Right? They're scary. My friends, the world sometimes is scary. And we have to deal with those scary things. But he shows us how to gather ourselves together, and through these values that he has sort of ingrained within him, he conquers that fear and then moves on to whatever it is. To whatever it is. All right. That's the tone. That's the setting as we start the book of Exodus and as we're going to move through.